To the Portsmouth School Board meeting for June 22nd, 2010. If I could ask the superintendent to please take the roll call.
Ann Mayer.
Here.
Carol Chelman.
Here.
Ed LePage.
Here.
Dexter Legg.
Here.
Rebecca Emerson.
Here.
Ann Walker.
Here.
Mitch Schulman.
Here.
Tom Martin.
Here.
Leslie Stevens.
Here.
Lisa Sweet.
Here.
Linda Burlett.
Here.
Bill Boynton.
Here.
Thank you. If you would rise and join me in the pledge.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'd like to offer a few words for a family that lost a long-term board member of over 20 years, Charlie Vaughn. I consider a very close and good friend. Died at the young age of 91. And Charlie was full of life. The last time I got to give a quick story is I saw Charlie was when he backed into one of my milk trucks. No damage to the milk truck, but he didn't do his vehicle any good. It was about 2 years, about 2 years ago. It wasn't the last time I saw him, but the last time he and I were having a really good chat, and how many things that he had done in life. And I want to thank Sally Vaughn for sharing Charlie, not just with the school board, but for a multitude of programs that Charlie participated in the city, including he had a short stint on the trustees of the trust fund, and another story was we didn't have enough candidates running that year for the school board, so as chairman that year, we looked around and we said, Charlie, are you interested? And he said, well, that'll give me 20 years. And I said, well, that's nothing in all the things that you've done. And he spent his last 4 years on the school board really getting the board educated on gender equality in education. If anybody was a champion for gender equality education, Charlie did that. And one other program that I'm going to ask in the very near future that we relook in Charlie's memory is really look at ROTC. He saw this as an advantage for kids, for so many disadvantaged kids and kids that want to enter into the armed forces, and being in a military community, and I am not military background, I really respected him for that, and I think it's something, again, we should visit for opportunities for students. But again, in memory of him tonight, I hope we can keep Charlie and his family in our prayers and thoughts.
Well said. Thank you very much. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Entertain a motion for the acceptance of the minutes from June 8th.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion on minutes? Any corrections, alterations? Want to take back things you said you wish you hadn't said? All in favor of accepting?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Anybody signed up for public commentary? Anybody sitting back there would like to get up and address the board? Okay, seeing none. We'll move on. So we have a couple of special presentations. Before we get to the two that are listed there, though, I'd like to do one that's not listed there. I would like to ask Phil to come up. This is, I'll see if I can. This is the last school board meeting that Phil will be attending as a student trustee, and so I'd like to send him off with a little gift, and I'd like to thank him for his time, his effort. I mean, I think the fact that students volunteer to be part of this board is a wonderful thing. Phil is going off to UNH next semester, and he's going to major in the perfect major for actually being a school board member, political science. So I'd like to thank you for your time and effort.
Thank you.
Wish you the best of luck. It's been wonderful having you.
Thank you.
And if we haven't scared him out of being a school board member yet.
Well, we'll see.
Okay. Next presentation.
Yes, I think City Attorney Sullivan is here this evening to answer any and all questions you may have. I know at the last board meeting there were questions around the Student Council Endowment Fund, and I think Bob may have some opening remarks, and then we'll field any questions you have.
Dr. Schulman, if I may.
Yes.
I know the school board members are aware of the background, but not everybody perhaps watching at home knows exactly what I'm here to talk about. So just provide a little bit of history. The city has, by charter, 3 elected trustees of trust funds. And under the city charter, all trust funds of the city shall be in the hands of the trustees. With that background, I was approached at one point by Bob Ducharme, who was advisor to the student council at the high school. Mr. Ducharme said that students at the high school were looking for a vehicle that could be used for them to raise funds themselves. These are not taxpayer dollars. They would raise funds by means of auctions and car washes or whatever occurred to them. But he wanted a place where they could put money and that would allow that money to be spent over time, essentially at the direction of the student council. Now, with that description of what he was looking for, putting the money into the hands of our city trustees of trust funds really seemed like the logical way to accomplish his goal. I met with him more than once. We met with Principal Collins, we met with the superintendent, and with some modification of what the student council wanted to have, the end product was a trust document that has been created and distributed to you. And basically the way this trust will work if it's created is that whatever funds are raised by the student council or from any other source to serve as basically an endowment funding for the student council, those funds will be held by the trustees, and they may be expended from time to time by vote of a committee. And the committee would consist of 4 then current members of the student council, because keep in mind this is their idea and their money, and you know, the whole thought from the beginning was that they would have significant involvement in everything that happened. But there would also be 3, if I may use the term, adult members of this committee, consisting of the high school principal or his designee, the superintendent or his designee, and a parent selected by those 2. So this committee would have to meet at least once a year. It would have to meet in accordance with the state right-to-know law, so there would have to be notice of when it was going to meet, and they would have to keep minutes of their votes, et cetera, et cetera. And then that group would be able to spend the money from this trust fund, essentially, however it chose, by 4 votes of the group. Now, there's one major fail-safe, at least I hope it's a fail-safe, which is that if perchance, let's just say that the students got some idea that wasn't really a good idea, but they held it firmly, the high school principal would have absolute veto power over any spending decision that they made. And the thought was that'll prevent anything, you know, frankly stupid from happening here, because the high school principal would be able to exert some intelligent thought on the process at the end. So this arrangement, it satisfied the student council, satisfied Mr. Ducharme. It was approved by the high school principal who was involved, and it was approved by the superintendent who was involved. So it was forwarded along to the school board. And the reason why it came to the school board is this. The formation of a trust requires that some person or entity be the trustor or the person or entity that forms the trust. It needs to be either a human being or a legally recognizable entity. The student council is not a legally recognizable entity. It is a subgroup of a subgroup of the schools. The student councils do not have the authority, acting on their own, to own property or sue or be sued. They're just simply not a legally cognizable entity. The logical legally cognizable entity to do this, I felt, was the school board. The school board has established many trusts. Typically they're scholarship trusts, but the very same principles apply. And so it was my suggestion that the 3 parties to this trust be the school board, the student council, who really are totally derivative of the school board, and the trustees of trust funds themselves, who by accepting this trust agree to administer it in accordance with its terms, and also in accordance with the significant amount of state law that regulates charitable trusts, which is what this will be. It is a very flexible document. It does not contain significant restrictions on how the money can be spent, except for the two things. The expenditure has to be voted by that committee, and has to be educationally related. That was done in a deliberate manner because the student council members, for example, thought that, to pick an example not directly connected with schools, well, suppose there was a family having difficulty in the city, and a reflection of the difficulty they were having, financial difficulty, was that the children were having problems getting to school or doing what they needed to do in school or just attending school. Could this money be spent at the discretion of the student council in indirectly educational ways to help that family? We wanted to answer that question to be yes. So we did not strictly limit this to direct educational purposes. It's as broadly worded as we could think, really requiring only some connection to education. So that's the story. That's how we got here today. The document that you have in front of you is not cast in stone. It is intended to be your trust, as well as that of the student council, so that if the school board wanted to see some changes in this, it's not too late to make them. As a matter of fact, it would be better to make them now. These trusts are quite difficult to change after they're adopted by every party. Requires approval of the Attorney General's office and either the probate or the Superior Court. So it's a wise move always to take time ahead of adoption of these things and do it so that it comes out the way you want it done. But with all that, I believe we are presenting to you a trust which would satisfy the goals of the student council and would also have the elements of administrative control necessary to make sure that the money wasn't used in any foolish way. That's with that presentation. I'm prepared to answer any questions anybody might have.
So, questions? Kent?
Yeah, Bob, I appreciate it, because I was kind of the one that began some of the questioning. And again, I have no problem with the way many of the things were answered tonight. I think I'm still left with a couple of things that make me wonder about, and I'll go back. I'm going to use the example of when we had the Clipper newspaper, the high school newspaper, and we ran into an editorial issue. And when you had the teacher that was in charge, and everybody's intent was good. Nobody was trying to be misrepresented. Nobody was, there was no bad play on anything. It became a control type thing of who and how the hierarchy of it actually went. And this kind of smells of the same type of a situation where you had a group and a decision's made. That decision wasn't maybe liked by the principal, then it wasn't liked by the superintendent, and it may have had board and may not have had board input. I really don't remember at that time. I think the superintendent. So here, when I hear that you say the principal has the final say, I mean, is it the principal or is it the superintendent that would have the final say? And that's question number one. I mean, principal works for the superintendent, so I kind of know the answer.
Right.
But then if we're the final decision party of this to some degree, as you pointed out, because we're the ones that have the some legal liability to it. And the only thing that kind of scared me a little bit in your discussion was you went from, and when we were described last week, I think from Bob Duchamp, who did a great job, is Bob explained it as being very educational focused. Now I hear a little bit different on it, that it's a lot broader than just education. So my two questions to you is, there's no way at this current time I don't see it in the trust here. I see that discussion more in the bylaws and the standing of the actual student council. And number two is, who does have the final say on something if it becomes somewhat controversial? And again, I just think of other things that have had that domino effect. And again, it's not that the students are trying to do anything, it's just perception sometimes.
Well, I recall the situation you're talking about with the student newspaper. And I would not be foolish enough to tell you that nothing can ever go wrong. It can always go
Just
wrong.
through experience.
However, the way the document is written, I think we've minimized that. Because, well, let's go back to the student newspaper issue. It was not clearly written, and it is First Amendment-related complications, that the high school principal, for example, could have absolute control over what appeared in the paper. That was not the case. With this trust, what is the case is not that the principal can spend this money. He actually can't. He or she can't. But the principal can prevent any expenditure. So that's taking into account the fact that this is really student council money. It was their idea. They're going to raise the money, and they should be, the ones who have a lot of say about what happens to it, but with some control. So the principal can't spend that student council money, but he can prevent them from spending it in an inadvisable fashion. And I think that works. Now you ask whether it's the high school principal or the superintendent. The way the document's written, it's the high school principal. But I'll tell you, if I was the high school principal, in real life, it would be the superintendent. Because that's just the chain of command and how decisions get made.
Thank you, Bob.
Dexter?
Bob, as these sorts of trusts or any trusts are set up, I understand that this represents a legal document, but are there other documents that tend to describe either the mission or the objectives of the trust, or try and bring some clarity on the purpose of the trust? I mean, presumably, when the student council presented this idea to their advisor, they conceived this in a way that probably defined, at least to their satisfaction, what the intent was. And it does two questions, I guess. Does that documentation exist at all? And to what extent does that tie into this as sort of providing legal direction, if you will?
The documentation does not exist.
Okay.
It could. These trusts this is extremely terse and brief, as you see. Explanatory provisions could be put into this, whereas student council want to raise money for some purpose or whatever. That kind of language could be written and put in here, or it could be adopted by the student council itself as some kind of a bylaw as to how the student members will work. Those are two ways that documentation could come into existence. If there were disputes over whether a particular expenditure was appropriate, that it would be helpful to have that kind of documentation. It's not necessary to have the trust function, and it's not in here yet. If the school board would like to see some kind of introductory provisions of that nature.
Because a follow-on question, I understand that once this is created, it's very difficult legally to change.
Yes.
On the other hand, mission statements and bylaws of the student council are a little bit easier to adapt over time.
Yes.
And I absolutely recognize that we want to build flexibility over a 20 or 25 or 50-year period because the world will change. But frankly, from my perspective, this is such a broad document that I would feel more comfortable, because I think they've had those sorts of discussions. I'd feel more comfortable if the student council had captured their intent in bylaws or mission statement that would support this. And if that was the direction they'd be given, then I'm absolutely comfortable with this. But otherwise, I still, at the end of the day, the school board is being asked to support a very broad legal document that just makes me a little uncomfortable.
Well, maybe we can actually do both of the things you mentioned. We could add some preliminary provisions to this, talking about the background purposes, and we could add into the trust an instruction that the student council adopt bylaws to control its voting in connection with this trust.
I mean, from my perspective, that would satisfy my concerns.
Okay. So, does anyone else have any questions? Yes, Ann.
I just had a quick question. Do you guys already have a mission statement written?
Well, I mean, it was when this whole idea was conceived, it was really, I would say it was loosely based, but the idea, merely, if I can put it broadly, is to serve for educational-based purposes. That's really what our major intent with it was. Now, obviously, since this, document is written so broadly, there can be those, different interpretations. From my understanding, it would be just to serve for educational-based purposes, meaning if the students wanted to, go ahead and buy, new computers for the school, or new books or stuff like that, or given the case, let's say a family's home was destroyed by a fire, we could help out in that way. Those, I know what you're saying, like they might be. That was never. No, that was never personally put into a folder. I mean, obviously it can be to make it more concise. But I mean, our intent was to simply do it for educational-based purposes. I mean, obviously, it can be reworked that way.
Okay. So essentially, Attorney Sullivan, is it the kind of thing that you would then take this, go back, and then resubmit to us at the
Sure,
next
that's
meeting?
my thought. I'd much rather go slow and get it right and get it a way that everybody's happy with than try to do something.
Yeah.
So why don't I suggest I'll bring you back another version.
Kent.
And again, we're not trying to delay. We, I think, as a board, have supported this in the 2 years that it's been in existence. I think the issue is that we're not all going to live as long as Charlie Vaughan and watch things to 91 and say, that's what we know that the kids wanted, that's what the intent was. And I really think Philip hit it upon there, that if there was that, and I really appreciate what Dexter was saying, because that was my uncomfortableness when we met last time, is that it's very broad. You answered several questions. I think the only other question I had is, and I just asked this, is that, because I did kind of look on it, you can't vote in the state, or you can't vote in the United States under 18, but you are able to make a financial decision, because, I mean, their goal is very, very, lofty. $10 million to anybody is a great foundation. And I know it's going to take several years, if not more, to get to that point. They're probably smarter than us and get there faster. But I just say that there is no statute that stops them from being able to make that. I wouldn't want to get down the road and somebody puts something in there that blocks these students from being able to make that decision. As far as you know, that's that.
Right. I do not know of any law that will prevent the students from serving on a committee such as we have here.
Right.
I do not think that a student acting alone without the backing of the school board could create distrust.
Right.
But I'm saying when it comes down to actually making a vote for money to be expended, let's say it's $1 million, and everybody's underage, that you...
No, I believe the students could, in the way that we've set it up here, I think the students could.
Okay, thank you very much.
There is another related bit of information. There's an entirely different group out in the community talking from time to time about creating an endowment for the school department.
Correct.
And these are the term, because both the student council and that other group, which are Portsmouth High School graduates from years past, because each of them uses the term endowment, there has been some confusion from time to time about who's doing what, and I've talked with their lawyer, they have a lawyer, I've talked with them about what they're doing and compared it to what the student council wants to do, and they really at this point are separate things. And the other endowment group is actually envisioning significantly less control from within the school department about how the money would be spent, whereas the school department would, in the end, totally control how this money gets spent.
So I appreciate what you'll do. It makes good sense, right? So on one hand, you'll have something in that will talk about students having bylaws, and on the other hand, it's not so restrictive that over time the bylaws and mission can change in 50 years.
That'll be the target.
Which is perfect. That's terrific.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. Yes, Tom.
And this is, Bob, one other question. This will just be known as the Student Council Endowment Fund. It's not going to be legally known as the Clipper Fund,
Right, that was my original suggestion for a name.
we're not going to infringe on, Fidelity's Clipper Fund.
Right, the student, we put in a provision.
That's maybe we tap into it, right?
So the student council could call it the Clipper Fund if they wanted.
Right, AKA,
Right,
Okay.
but the real name is going to be Portsmouth High School Student Council Endowment Fund.
Yeah, don't want any trademark infringements.
Thanks for your time.
Good point. Thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
I noticed there were some people who came in after the meeting started and after the call for public comment, so can we just maybe check to see if anybody wanted to get in on that?
Okay, I don't mind doing that. But they just left.
Oh.
So. Oh.
Well, no, there was another.
Okay, so the question was, and we'll save it after this presentation, Lisa? After the next presentation. If anybody who came in since we missed the first public commentary part would like to come up and speak after this next special presentation, you're more than welcome to. Otherwise, we'll just keep on moving. Okay, moving along now to the next presentation.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we had a tour of the PEEP program earlier this evening, and now Paula Wensley, the Special Services Director, and Beth Satir, who runs the PEEP program, will do a brief presentation. Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you. I know that people had an opportunity to tour and ask any questions, but I just want to know, do we want Deb and Marion to stay through the presentation? Do you think you might have questions, or can I excuse them to carry on with their evening?
One member at least would like you to stay.
Okay. Okay. Is that all right? Okay. So I don't have a long formal presentation for you this evening. In your board packet, you got some background information regarding the laws that we follow in operating the preschool program and the different requirements that we have. You also have a history of the Portsmouth Early Education Program, and you've got some basic information about the establishment of the collaboration between Families First, Community Child Care Center, Head Start, and the Portsmouth Early Education Program. And I also left on for you brochures for Community School, Head Start, and the Portsmouth Early Education Program. So just in a very kind of brief, kind of broad brush, the Portsmouth Early Education Program was established in 1980 when school departments and school districts became responsible for providing early childhood special education services to young children with disabilities. And prior to that, those services were provided through Portsmouth Rehab. So actually, the OT on our staff and the PT and our speech pathologist, I think, started there. And then moved over to where I think we began was at the middle school in the music wing. And there were 3 or 4 classes there. We were there for some period of time, moved out to the Jones School, where we were housed with Community Child Care Center and Head Start in our own classrooms that were taught by early childhood special educators. And we didn't collaborate with Head Start or Community Child Care very much. Through the establishment of this building by the Foundation for Seacoast Health, the intent was if we were co-located in the same place, that we would be able to establish a much bigger collaboration that would benefit the students that we're responsible for, which are children with disabilities, Head Start students and community child care students, in the thinking that early childhood education is beneficial for all children and should look the same for all children, and that given your disability category or your socioeconomic status should not determine the quality of the early childhood education you receive. So for the last 9 years, we've worked very closely together, our 3 agencies, in establishing really very high-quality early childhood classrooms for all of our students. We've been able to place children with significant disabilities in typical preschool environments through Head Start and community school, which has allowed our children to really benefit very greatly from the teaching of an early childhood educator with support from special educators and special education staff. So at this point, I would entertain questions of the school board.
Okay. So just one quick one while people are thinking about their own. I mean, I think part of the reason that we're here this evening, and I know we've talked with Pete before, is that there have been suggestions by some members of this board, some members of the city council, as we went through this budget process, that we've been looking, that people are looking for ways for the school department to cut expenses. And this program actually has rent that it pays. Everybody in this building pays rent, right?
That is correct.
Right.
Everybody has a lease with the foundation.
So I guess my opening question really is, so can you talk a little bit about the level of integration the benefits that you see and the side effects, the positive or negative change, if in fact something like moving out of here were real?
Sure. 3 years ago, we did consider that very seriously. Deb Stokel and I toured the high school. We looked at 4 different classrooms, 2 on the first floor, 2 on the second. We investigated what would need to happen for those classrooms to become viable early childhood classrooms, around renovations to the space, renovations for bathrooms, square footage usage, and distance kind of requirements, like how close does the bathroom need to be to the classroom, kind of thing. I mean, here, the children's bathroom is located inside the classroom. So every classroom in the building has a bathroom in it. We don't have to worry about that. But if it were not, then you'd have to wonder about the distance that would take place. So I think, just very briefly, after investigating all of that, I think the school board at that time decided that the amount of renovation that would be necessary could be cost prohibitive, and that it would significantly change the way in which the program operated. That with 2 classrooms, we would virtually be a self-contained special education program. That we wouldn't have the slots available for typical children to attend in any number that we would deem significant. I think that personally and professionally, my belief is that our children benefit significantly because the vast majority of the children they're going to school with are typically developing children. And that replicates very closely what occurs for us at the elementary level, where we have 3, 4 children identified in each one of our elementary classrooms, but the rest of the kids are typically developing friends from which our children can benefit through role modeling.
And that wouldn't happen at the high school?
It couldn't happen in the high school because I think the space that we would require for our special education students would take up all the slots that we could put together. So, and I had said earlier that, you know, we're starting the year with 30 students. By December, we'll be at 33. So if you want to divide 33 students into 4 classrooms, you're taking up the vast majority of the slots available.
Thank you. Yes, Rebecca.
So if PEEP were to move, can you tell us a little bit about some of the other services that these families might not have access to, or other programs that aren't directly part of PEEP but that impact the kids?
Sure. Located here at the campus with us, of course, is Families First, which is a primary health care center that includes a dental clinic and a family support center that offers parenting classes that a lot of our families take advantage of. There are evening activities for families. There's one going on right now. I could hear the kids down the hall that include kind of recharge for parents, an opportunity just to get together, share a meal, where children are cared for in their child care room, and so families can support each other, and the kids are well taken care of in the meantime. Head Start is a federally funded program for low-income families, so our children with disabilities who are coming from families with low incomes wouldn't be able to access Head Start services, which includes a comprehensive preschool program, 5 mornings a week. It includes breakfast and lunch. It includes home visiting by home visitors associated with Head Start. And they have a mental health worker as well that can provide consultation to the staff and to families when those kids need that. Community Child Care Center is also a comprehensive child care program that has a myriad of service for low-income families. They, if you qualify, your child care expenses can be subsidized, so families wouldn't have access to that. In addition, there are other nonprofit agencies located here that families have accessed, like Child Advocacy Center, like the More Than Wheels program, or like the Prescription Drug program, that wouldn't, of course, be co-located with us. So we'd be far more difficult for families to access if it wasn't right here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. Any other questions? Kent.
Yeah. And anybody that doesn't believe, and I know, Beth, we go back to one of the very first buildings, is when I got involved. And, the dilemma comes, and we have one tonight. We're cutting a position tonight that's getting all of us emails and discussion about it. And this is just, I believe, the beginning of us cutting to the bone in the city. Next year, I truly believe the $259,000 cut that we're getting tonight will be well over $800,000. I think we'd be foolish to think it's not, looking and hearing from the tea leaves. And when I look at any of these things, and again, I am a strong supporter. I believe in people 100%. Beth, I brought in elected officials to see you, people running for high office in the state, because I think the program is stellar. I don't think there is much like it out there. So when we face this in a year from now, you know, the possibility, and again, I know we get some funding that comes in differently to support, you know, Pete, because it's federal dollars. I'm well aware of that, you know, with the emails I got in regards to that. And I know we have a great relationship with Deb Stokel's group, which is just, you know, blossomed into again, a program that I know other communities are trying to mirror out there, and I don't want to see the dismantling of that. And I think there may be ways that creatively, if we do hit this wall in the next 12 to 24 months, we're going to have to be creative, because it's not just the amount. And again, I think it should be known, because we have a document here, you know, we're reducing your square footage, or, you know, the suggestion, you know, and that's a significant amount of square footage that you're being reduced this year here, which saddens me that we're going to have impact that way. That's going to have impact on your program. So my question to you, Beth, is, you know, knowing that out at the Jones School you took all sorts of donations and so forth, and I hear you loud and clear that the other entities of community campus have strong ties with the PEAP program. We wouldn't dissolve the program because we're mandated to have it. It would have to have a different hat on, obviously. Yet maybe when, you know, whether it's the high school, whether it's Dundee, I mean, we keep talking about the high school. I think there are other buildings. I truly believe, budget-wise, if Jones School had not been taken back over by PDA, we may have done some things there to keep rent coming on in and so forth. I think there, because we're of the balance and so forth, because we were the last ones really out of that building. Actually, Families First and Head Start came over here before we moved. I think there was a year, maybe even about a year lapse or so, I think.
I think we all moved in the fall of 1999. But I think they may have come first.
Right. So I really hope, you know, that we don't get to that point. It's a matter of our relationship with the council, of how we can not, because it's $1 sign when we get down to it, just like tonight. It isn't $259,000. It's programming. We're starting to dismantle it. So in the next year, just like we're looking at things, maybe there are ways to look at, whether it be, I'll just use the word grants, maybe there are other state funding resources, maybe there is a learning collaborative with, I'll even use going over into Kittery. I don't know what Kittery has, but I doubt Kittery has this. And we don't have, and correct me if I'm wrong, do we now have any tuition students in the...
We don't have any tuition students at this time.
We have in the past.
We have in the past, yes.
And I think, you know, if we had 15 tuition students, guess what? I think you then get your square footage back. And I think then you have a foundation of money that we don't bark at, because we tell the city council that gets to be left alone. So I really think in the next year, not just you, Beth, because I think you do a great job along with everybody out here, I think it comes down to every group looking at efficiencies and so forth. And I wouldn't say there are any boundaries. Like I say, look at Kittery, or maybe Elliott, or relationships further down to, you know, the Hampton area.
Well, I think, is your question whether or not we could take tuition students into the program to help balance the cost?
I would say that's a big question, yeah. And I know federal guidelines are a lot different, because now the federal money is a little bit, I know my good friend Ann Rare here, they have money that they didn't have a few years ago that's allowed them to have a program. which is, good, because I don't like to see kiddos on the bus that age too long. But I also want to make sure they're getting the services. So yes, tuition students, if it's possible. And if it's not, then I think you have to come back and say, no federal guidelines, no, everybody is set in, the immediate region area.
I think if we had a request for a tuition student, I think we would seriously consider that. I think what's happened over the course of the last 8 years is that the districts that were sending tuition students to us because they couldn't program for them have created their own programs inside their district and have decided to keep those students there.
Right.
So periodically I get phone calls from very small districts who might have 1 or 2 preschoolers a year who are identified, who are looking for, investigating placement. But for any district that has even 11 identified students, they're creating their own program inside their own district. So I think that is the reason we no longer have tuition students, not because we didn't want them, but because they've gone away back to their own districts.
But I just finished. Maybe there's partnerships there with some of these districts that whether, and I don't mean to pick on Kittery, but, maybe Kittery's looking, I saw that, they're looking at budget woes over there, and maybe it would be, consolidation of a community of some population that they're looking for, some way to reduce their costs, and it may be cheaper for them to have students to come to a very good program.
Yeah. In the state of Maine, the school districts are not responsible for children until they get to elementary school, and so young children with special needs are served through an agency very similar to Community Developmental Services here, or OneSky. So in that way, that they do not pay for programming for their children, they pay for therapies.
And again,
But we could certainly do outreach and contact some of our smaller neighbors. Maybe partnership with Newmarket, maybe partnership with some others.
And I wouldn't be shy of some of the larger ones. They may say, it makes more sense. And some will say, no, we want to keep them local, and this is why. Thank you.
Becca.
I have a question for Deb Stokel. So to hear from the community campus side of things, because we heard from what happens to the PEAP program if it moves out, could you talk a little bit about what happens if you lose that rental income and if you lose that group of children? How would that impact the rest of the services and programs?
Could you come up to the table? Sorry.
We could not afford to assume the rent on at least 2 of the half-day preschool classes. I kind of sent some information out that shows that the tuition that we generate, the expenses that we put out kind of match it. So you can see that we're giving back everything we get at this point in terms of tuition. So I don't believe that we could assume the rent on at least 2 of the classrooms. The third full-day classroom, I think we will have to assume the rent on, which would actually put us into a deficit status, because we have full-day families that we're committed to, who also have children with special needs. So
this would impact not only the PEAP program, which would change, but it would impact every other agency that's in this building?
Well, for Community Child Care Center, it would definitely impact us in a lot of ways. That's a financial impact. We'd kind of have to untangle our budgets. We budget for those classes as if they were, and they are, our programs. We don't separate anything out. So we would have to rebudget. We would have to spread some indirect costs back over the other classrooms. And we would have to, if you were withdrawing completely from the collaboration, which I hope would never happen, we would definitely have to find, a way to cut about $120,000 in expenses that are directly related to community school at this point, but we share some staff. So the teachers that teach in community school in the morning also teach in our before and after school kindergarten program in the afternoon. So I think it amounts to about 80 staffing hours that we would have to cut, not necessarily all personnel from community school. We'd have to readjust our staffing completely. The programming changes, you know, for us at Community Child Care Center, we are very lucky to have this program in our programming. It gives our children an opportunity to experience, both typically developing and children with special needs, both groups experience a very diverse early childhood experience that I don't believe they would otherwise experience. 80% of our students are children from Portsmouth. So not only are the special needs children being placed with their typically developing peers in terms of development and chronological age, they are literally with their peers. They are with the peers that they will enter kindergarten with. They are with the peers that will be in first, second, third grade. So they're already forming relationships. And one of the biggest advantages, you know, directly to the Portsmouth School Department, I think, is in terms of behavior. And so when we get a child that might be diagnosed with autism, we work very closely with PEEP to integrate them into a typically developing classroom as soon as possible, and that includes, you know, sharing strategies for behavior, sharing goals for behavior, being kind, being safe, working together. So hopefully by the time you get these children in kindergarten and first grade, and your kindergarten and first grade teachers could hopefully confirm this, they are miles ahead of a child who would have begun they're learning the social graces of behavior had they not attended between the ages of 3 and 5. So our children benefit from that as well.
Thank you. And then, sorry, may I?
Keep talking.
And then, sort of to follow up on that, we received information about what it would cost to move PEEP, but this, I'm assuming, is when you looked at it 3 years ago. So the rough estimate to retrofit the building has certainly changed. But then I guess we don't have a cost of what it would cost to maintain that. You know, that's just the one-time move. But I noticed in the literature you gave us, you talk about sharing the space, and you share staff, and you share other resources. So I think, you know, if this is something that the board decides to look into, we need to have those sorts of numbers also, because there will be a cost associated with it.
Thank you. Tom.
Yeah, one, I just, for the record, I think this is a great program, and every time I walk in here, I'm always impressed with what I see. I think the piece that's really missing here, and part of the discussion, is that, you know, we talk about expenses and what we would save, but I think the way I want to frame it out is that for spending this small amount of money on rent, we're saving a tremendous amount of money that really gets layered very thinly on so many other social programs that we provide in the city that are not budgeted. And I think the discussion always is hard because you have some of these intangibles that you can't quantify, that if we spend this amount of dollars, you know, we can save 3x. And have we done anything like that to sort of quantify it? But, I mean, I know, I believe it, I see it. I know that it's paying dividends because we're getting kids who potentially could be marked as special ed for their entire career, K through 12, maybe identified and moved into regular class, then they're actually moving out of special ed. So I see those as all costs that we are actually saving by spending this money up front. But have we? Is there anything that we can do? Because I know this discussion is going to continue.
Right.
But to me, I just recognize that, you know, spending money up front, we're actually saving money, and it could be, you know, 3-4x down the road.
I don't know that we've actually done what you've asked, not that it can't happen and that we can't focus attention on doing that. One important thing that I think happens for us is, particularly for our children with more significant disabilities, the earlier we can, as Deb had mentioned, work with their social behavior around their peers and have them learn behaviors that would allow them to be in the regular classroom, the less risk we're at for placing them outside the district. So, and out-of-district placements are very expensive. So if our children don't learn those behaviors early and we can't get them into a regular classroom in kindergarten successfully, then the risk that by 3rd, 4th, 5th grade we're looking at an out-of-district placement in a special ed program is very prohibitive.
Thank you. And I think the two things that I take away is, one, that I think people need to recognize that this level of integration is a model program that other communities would die to be able to develop and implement on their own. And then two, that this is short money. This is really cheap money that we're spending to be able to cure a lot of other things. And so I would ask, that is something on the list to be able to, craft a response to just make sure people understand that, there's a method to the madness, and that we're achieving it.
So happy to do that, Tom. Thank you.
Lisa.
Another impact we might articulate more is, I've heard people suggest that, you just move them over to the high school. There's the Little Clipper program. So, you can just put them in with those typical kids. Can you talk about that impact at all? I mean, I understand that the Little Clipper program has its unique curriculum as well, and certain goals that they're trying to accomplish that might not be in line with...
Sure. The Little Clippers is a preschool program. It operates 4 mornings a week from 8 to 11. The intent of that program is to offer opportunities for high school students to practice what they're learning in their child care class as they are taking human growth and development, say. So every student who's taking that class needs an opportunity to get into the classroom and to, do activities with the children, to interact with children, create an art activity, do a circle activity, do a gross motor activity. The intent of what we're doing here through community school and through Head Start is really to provide a high-quality early childhood education for the child that's attending the program. So for high school students who are just learning about typical development, to ask them then to become experts in children with disabilities, I think, is asking a lot. For our students, controlling the quality, for our own students with disabilities, controlling the quality of the interactions between the students and our children, controlling the quality of the curriculum would be difficult to do. And there are lots of students in and out of that classroom over the course of the morning because everyone needs an opportunity to do that. And for children with autism or mental retardation, Down syndrome, that many people transitioning in and out of their morning would be very difficult for them. I mean, currently they've got an early childhood teacher that they closely identify with. They've got a paraprofessional that they identify with, a special educator. So, you go from having 3 people that might cross your path in the morning in addition to speech, language, and OT to maybe 8 students or 10 students that might cross your path over the course of the morning would be challenging.
And right now we use a team approach. So when the team meets, it's based around the lead teacher, the assistant teacher, the special educators. And I don't think you would be able to maintain that.
Right. I think it'd be difficult to meet with students on any kind of regular basis to discuss particular children and what their needs are, what accommodations they need throughout the course of their day to be successful.
Thank you.
Okay, and I have Linda.
Yeah. Hi, Linda. Listen, can you do me a favor, and will you just speak for a minute about the law? I mean, where these little peepers come from, and if, in fact, you were to change the makeup of their current programming, do you set the district up for any potential lawsuit? Because this is what they've become accustomed to, and like anything else, you're changing what their plan is. Is that a reality?
I think if we were to change the composition of the program and go from an inclusive or an integrated program to a self-contained program, parents who've had the experience of their children with disabilities being with typical friends would likely file a complaint to the Department of Ed and ask for the stay put clause, which would mean that they would stay where they are until somebody determined that a self-contained program was appropriate for them.
we talk about where the little kiddos come from? Because you had said that you had 30 kids enrolled for the fall.
Yep.
With potential of 3 more.
Yep.
So can you kind of...
Sure. Most of the vast majority of the children that we're serving are coming from early supports and services, which is birth to 3. That's another piece of federal legislation under Part, are we B, preschool, and they're Part C. They're Part C of the federal legislation, so that there are private agencies out there that are providing support services to children birth to 3. As they approach their 3rd birthday, the school department is contacted, and we need to make a determination of their continued eligibility for support. And we then, by their 3rd birthday, determine whether they're eligible. If they're a student with a disability and require special ed services, then we're required to provide those services to them.
So how typical, Beth, is it? I know that Tom had said that maybe they would be not getting special ed services over time. Is that typical?
For some children, it is very typical that with early intervention, we can discharge.
Speak to, that might be a speech and language thing, but a lot of the kids at this point...
It is certainly speech and language. For those children with a mild disability, we can work with them over the course of their preschool years and look at discharge at the end of kindergarten or 1st grade. And we're lucky enough that that happens probably 3 times a year, that a student leaving our program will be discharged after their kindergarten year. But the vast majority of the children that we're serving right now are children with more significant disabilities. Of the 32 children that we will be serving next year in the fall, 10 of those children have autism. 3 of those children have Down syndrome. I have a child with Mobius syndrome, which is a facial deformity that impairs speech, and a child with Cornelia de Lange syndrome. So those are children with significant impairments. They're not speech and language children who have articulation issues.
Thanks.
Okay.
Welcome.
Just keeping my eye on the clock because we need to be out of the building tonight at a certain time. So is there any other quick questions that, seeing none, I want to thank you for your time for tonight.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Great, thank you.
Well done, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Amy?
Okay, so moving on, I think there was a request from a board member that for people who came in later who maybe didn't have an opportunity to sign up to make a public comment during the public commentary section, if there's anybody here who would like to do that, now would be the time. Okay, seeing none. So we'll move on then.
That's good.
Sure. I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, in your packet you received some items for information, copies of the June edition of Board and Administrator, spring issue of the New Franklin Gazette, where among many items you can read about are the traditions that New Franklin has had over the years and how they're addressing that, as well as a host of summer reading recommendations for students. You also have the Donderific publication highlighting the recognition assembly that was held for Miss LeMay last week, as well as the 5th graders' reflections on their time at Dondero. We also have some correspondence, particularly 2 resignations. Lisa Salter, who was an earth science teacher at the Portsmouth High School, and Josh Evans, a 5th grade teacher at Dondero, are leaving the district. You have a thank you note from Karen Schuster. And I want to draw your attention to the Great Schools Partnership Invitation and share with you that we've been invited to explore joining a cohort of high schools participating in a federally funded grant intended to strengthen the high school experience. So essentially, Principal Collins and I will go on Friday to hear a little bit more about how well this aligns with where we're headed. But essentially, the grant is 5 years. You can be awarded up to $2 million. And the overall goals of this grant are to increase the graduation rate, increase post-secondary attendance, and actually decrease the percentage of students who go on to college and needing to take remediation courses. The particular strategies they're looking for are for schools to personalize learning, but part of this effort is to kind of reach consensus with other schools as to where you want to go with that. They recommend teams, houses, etc. We've been quite clear with them that the high school works well as currently configured, but we're interested in learning how to personalize the learning for students. It's also looking for schools to develop professional learning communities, so we're well aligned there, as well as develop and implement an early college program of sorts. So we have an opportunity with Great Bay Community College, et cetera, to explore that as well. So we think it's a good opportunity. It's aligned with our vision and where we want to go as a high school, and so I'll follow up more information after Principal Collins and I go on Friday. I also got late Friday and put in your packet a request from SAU 31 in Newmarket and Superintendent Lister, basically asking if the district had any interest in exploring a merger opportunity as they look to, they have three choices. I think, Superintendent Lister is doing his due diligence in terms of seeing whether there are outside districts that are interested as they go through a three-part process to perhaps even build their own high school down the road. Two other items that are not there, but I wanted to quickly mention.
Mr. Chair?
One is...
And we'll come back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Very quickly, I just wanted to mention that the Efficiencies Committee, the Mayor's Blue Ribbon Panel, is going to meet on Thursday morning. We did have a quick meeting with board members last week to kind of do some pre-planning around that, but it'll be largely an organizational meeting Thursday morning. And you had the update from the city manager and Judy Belanger in terms of the budget information, so that's on your table, and you should have received that information this evening. That's it for the superintendent's report.
Kent.
Actually, I'd like to make comment on two things, because the Efficiency Committee and the new letter from the Newmarket School District. We've been down this road a total of, over the last 17 years, 6 times, twice with this township of Deerfield, twice with Fremont, once with Newmarket, and Kittery also. And I see a lot of time and effort that goes into this, and it's more of a discussion thing to see what's better for the students. It's not a fishing expedition, as some might say. Newmarket has to make a decision. They have had, this dilemma. They had an excellent opportunity, but they are a township, which has to do a city vote, a town vote, and by, I think it was 54 votes, lost on an excellent opportunity to build or purchase the property there. I really would make a suggestion that we at least give courtesy to have two board members sit and discuss with two board members and their superintendent anything that might help them get there. As I see it, there may be one long-term or one short-term type of goal. Maybe it's something that's very similar that we do with our sister SAUs currently, and have tuition students in, or have them be part of our community. Secondarily, this may be something that allows the town of Newmarket to realize it's $14,500 and change a year per student, plus busing, so you're talking maybe roughly $16,000 or more for the students to come here. It's not a great distance. Matter of fact, people always think Newmarket is, some faraway place. Actually, the kids in Stratham that live on the Greenland line have a further distance to go to the town of Exeter, where the new high school is. If you take the travel time, my milk routes happen to know. So that's how we measure, is from school district to school district. But bottom line is I think we should at least give the courtesy. It may be an opportunity for them to utilize our school system if there is something there, but more importantly, it may make them wake up and help them wake up in the community of Newmarket. They really need to do something for their kids. This is not anything new. I believe the last time we had this, it's probably now going 5 to 6 years. It might be slightly longer than that, and they have had no rectification with their past problems. So I would put a suggestion, and again, I'll just ask that we have two board members meet with a couple of their board members and the two superintendents and maybe the principal along with that, so there's an understanding.
Yes.
Well, I have a question. You said that we've looked at it with Kittery as well, and I think they're also kind of looking to see what their best move is. If two board members are going to spend time on Newmarket, would they also, spend time on Kittery as well? I mean, I don't know that they've approached us at all, but would that make sense if it's been done in the past?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we've had subcommittees in it in the past, and Kittery right now, as I understand, is not doing anything different. They actually, I mean, if there's an interest there, yes, Lisa, I would say that you might as well have that group entertaining. And this is not to look for new revenues for the city of Portsmouth. It's truly not. It's something that's educationally sound for the kids to make sure it's a way to go.
Although if we do this, this is the one that's in front of us today.
That's correct, right. And if something came out of this, those committee members could move on to that.
Dexter.
So the other thing I'd ask is the administration, obviously, this just came in over the transom, and so you might not have had any chance to think about it, but what I'd ask is for the administration, and Kent's approach may be the right one, you might have thought of other approaches to attack this issue and to come back with a recommendation to the board on how we should proceed. I think that's premature, though, because you're not presenting that. So I'm assuming at our next meeting, you'll give us some guidance.
Well, the only difficulty is the letter Dexter said that he was hoping to have some kind of an answer by June 28th.
So then what I'd ask is that when something like this comes in, I mean, what's the framework that you look at to even consider whether it's worth even spending time evaluating?
I see, yeah, and I think that's a fair question, but I think maybe Kent's suggestion is a good one insofar as just have an offhand, just an offline conversation with, Superintendent Lister and perhaps a board member or two. I think that's fair.
I'm okay with that, but I guess I'm asking is that we have some sort of structured approach that we try and early on minimize the effort, to Lisa's point, and maybe learn enough to say, yeah, there may be something there, or
and we find
there isn't, and here's why.
Right. So you're right.
That's all. So thanks.
And we're not the summer, where we're meeting just once a month. We might have a little more opportunity.
And I agree, by the way, we shouldn't be thinking about this as a revenue opportunity. That's the wrong way to think about it.
Absolutely.
And so I would encourage anybody who sees this as somehow a way of solving our budget problem. It's not the way to think about it at all.
Right. Rebecca.
His letter just says, if you'd be interested in further discussion, let me know by the 28th, and I think we are interested in further discussions because we don't know where it's going to go.
So that's how I'll respond.
Okay.
Well, let us know how. No foul.
I just wanted to comment on Joshua Evans' letter.
Okay, wait, before you get to that, I just want to stay on this for 1 second.
Oh, sorry, I thought we were done.
So if we ask the superintendent to contact Dr. Lister, what I would like to know is who would be, informally, who would be interested in actually participating in that discussion? So, I mean, if you're willing to raise your hand.
allowed.
I mean, if we're going to have 2 board members, so I suppose the answer would be to let me know or let Ed know that you're interested. Okay? Okay. Yes, Leslie.
To my knowledge, we've lost Joshua because of the contracts being held. Is that correct?
Essentially. That's right.
And I just want to say how sorry I am that that is the case, because we were worried about that when we held those 40 contracts, and fear has been come to fruition. I had a parent approach me, her 5th grader had him this year, and said how much she had appreciated him and how much her student had appreciated him. And I just wanted to say publicly that I'm really sorry that this is the situation that we're in, and we're losing a really good 5th grade teacher because of the budget woes and the holding of the contracts, and sorry to see him go.
Yes, Ken.
Just in regards to the superintendent's dialogue regarding the efficiency and the correspondence, as we did meet, and I think it was a very productive meeting that we met for about an hour with Steve and the superintendent, Rebecca and Carol. I think we need to also know as a board, we're looking at this very broadly, and we're then going to also look at it very narrowly on subjects. We had a good discussion to look at whether we want to stay in the building business, or do we want to be have a building agreement with the city where they become a property manager for us. I think there are a multitude of things that you sort of throw against the wall, and if they stick, that's great, and try to find it. But it is not a large window of opportunity when you really look at that the superintendent by September will be starting, and sooner, looking at budget numbers and so forth. It's been well said by counselors and by the city management that this is not going to be large cost savings dollars in the immediate time frame, but over the long term, will it make things more efficient and so forth? Such as, we currently contract with electrician and plumber. Well, the city has electrician and plumber on duty, so do we start to look at, letting them become the property manager more than what we do? We're in the business of education, as long as we're provided, and there's a committee, and I hate to call it a JBC, but that's exactly what you'd be looking at, is a joint building type committee that allows to make sure our buildings are meeting the standards. Again, we had, I think, a fairly successful first meeting, but we don't want surprises. One of the things was that we discussed is we didn't want to surprise board members in how broad we're going to be and how narrow we're going to be.
Okay. Good. It's a good discussion to have. Yes, Ann?
I had a question of the two teachers that have resigned. Is there a plan to rehire for those positions, the 5th grade and the high school science?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay, moving on. Where are we? To district reports for Steve Bartlett.
Okay, I can give you a quick update of an in-process operation because we still have another payroll that'll take place tomorrow with some hourly parts coming in, so they're hard to determine. But I can tell you that we had all the teachers' payrolls done, so that's the biggest piece. These are the paras and clericals and subs and the miscellaneous payrolls tomorrow. So that'll be the last one. I can say overall that we're still waiting for a bunch of bills to come in. I've got some estimates. Overall, we're going to come out in a positive position. The most significant effort, which I think will remain, will be the energy savings that we identified early on of approximately $140,000 will probably remain. A number of the other savings are going to be offset by some of the, I think you remember a month or so ago I gave you some areas that I knew would potentially have savings and other ones where we'd have, over expenditures. There was, some special ed area which we expected, dental insurance, unemployment, and of course maintenance and things like that. So as all the sugar's out, I'll be able to give you some more exact figures, but it does take some time to sugar it out between now and then. But we will come out on the positive end, and we should have, like I say, the energy savings at least to be able to work with.
Okay. Yes, Leslie.
I think Lisa had her hand up first.
I'm sorry.
Well, of the energy savings that we were forecasting, have we already taken that chunk and kind of used it in our budget already? Just
this year, you mean?
For upcoming.
For netting out? No, I'm saying that's probably one that should hold untouched on netting other pieces out. Or drop to the bottom. Yeah, I'm hoping that's the one that we can identify that will drop to the bottom. Okay. But again, it still could be affected by some of the other ones because we're still just going with estimates. We've got only part of April and none of May, and we have to prorate June. So, I did that based on history, but it still could be different.
Okay. Leslie, yes.
So my question would be, again, if we get to that point and we have money left, what happens? And we've talked in the past about whether we've asked John Bahenko about what happens with that money, and I know you've had conversations with him. One of my concerns is that I have city councilors say to me, when you have money left over, what does that show? What does that mean? And so I'm really concerned about us having money left over, which we all know isn't really the case, but, what we do.
I think you have to look at it in the proper, with the proper lens, is that in anticipation of some of these unknown over expenditures, especially in special ed, and still, even energy, we knew with rates, but if we had a tough winter, we could exactly go the other way. Same thing with additional maintenance if we'd had plowing and stuff. So, if you look at it with the proper lenses, we put a soft freeze on early on, and so until just this week, we get to a point where we can start saying, okay, now that I held you and held you and held you, what is it that's most important to you with what I can give you back to use up, because you're entitled to it and because, we held back on that. So it's not really, money that we didn't need.
Right,
it's
I
money that we diligently held back on to make sure that we didn't put, our department of the city in a deficit position.
But when we're asked that question next year, if we're in this position budget-wise, and we're asked by City Council, well, why did you have money left? I want to remember this conversation and be able to say, this is why.
Right.
And it wasn't money that was left over, it was money that we carefully,
Right,
But
I guess I'd like to point out that we still have
I understand.
more days in the year.
I understand that.
Okay, and
I'm
so
just
we-
saying, if we get to that point, I want to remember this moment and remember that we have an answer to this question because we've been asked it many, many times.
And I answer it the same way every time.
Well, so in essence, the administration prudently managed a budget, and we should
Exactly.
thank them for not having gone over budget.
Exactly.
And also, just to point out that a lot of the items are not that we suddenly decided to spend less money. These are environmentally driven, and...
That's true, too.
And so, be absolutely clear that this is not, we decided not to buy another book, and so we found some cost savings. These are environmentally driven, and they could easily, as Steve said, go the absolute opposite direction.
Right.
We're lucky.
Okay, Lisa, and then Kent, and then go ahead.
I think that goes into, we need to articulate the impacts of the budget and the decisions we've been making, and I think that is an impact. Having a soft freeze on for most of the year is an impact to education that we also need to make sure we remember and articulate, as well as the resignation that we just saw.
Question to us, Steve. Steve, in that soft type freeze that we have, were there any maintenance items that we did put off that would be, or near the type maintenance operational things that once you have the final budget number, probably in mid-August is when I think you usually have a almost clear picture. Do you think there was anything there that should be looked at that, and again, I'm not looking just to eat up the money to eat up the money. I'm looking to say, why would we spend the next year's money on that same type of thing? I feel like you had discussed something that was put off in one of the schools that needed to have some element of it done, but you had put it off. And I can't remember what it was. I apologize.
Well, I can't remember that particular conversation, so I'm not sure of that item. But I can tell you that if it ended up being a safety issue, one, we did not put it off.
Right.
That's why
It wasn't
maintenance
off.
is over. If there were items that were, convenience and comfort in some respects, they've been delayed. It doesn't mean they're not going to get done. As I refine this a little more, we're still going to try to go forward with these because we still have more time in this year.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
So just the final question then would be, when would you know within 10 days, or it would be actually longer than 10 days before we know what the actual budget last number is? And if there is money left over, how would we spend it? Because I don't see giving it back. I see using it for the ends that we intended. And do we need to spend that money by July 1st, or?
Technically, we talked to the city manager, and as long as we are reasonable and responsive and encumber money for specific items that are focused by June 30th, we're okay.
Right.
And we have done that in past years, and as far as I know, we'll be able to
So
continue
short of
to-
setting up this contingency fund that we've talked about in the past, the other option is to spend the money on issues that might have either been put aside or even things that we'd like to purchase next year.
And we are actually having that as part of a discussion on Thursday with the administrators.
Very good.
Based on, if I were able to give you back your money, what give me your priorities.
Okay.
Okay, so that's what we're working on.
Great.
Okay, and then just as an informational item, because it had been requested at the meeting where we had the phasing discussion, and it was requested for some more, I guess, legible information or copies. So I have a table, and I have, I think, a more legible picture.
This is
Not for discussion,
phasing
it's just
for
to
what?
pass off for people to have on the phasing discussion.
Thank you.
For middle school. Gotcha. Okay, any other quick questions? I hesitate to ask because we'll be in here longer. Okay, so thank you, Steve. So moving on to old business, the nice thing is we've just taken A off the list. So we'll move to consideration and approval of the final budget adjustments from the city number, and I'll ask Mr. McDonough to address that.
In your materials, you have the administrative team's proposed adjustments to achieve the final budget approved by the City Council on June 7th. So I'd like to just highlight some of those. I mean, the first impact, Steve is trying to talk to me here, so.
If I could, we should have perhaps had an opportunity to address earlier. I thought we might take an opportunity to welcome our new student representative to the board before we started a longer discussion.
I had no idea. Sorry.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Really need a mic.
Next victim.
If she's listening to this, she's not sure she's going to continue.
I've kept her as far away from the door as possible. First of all, thanks for letting us come tonight. Thank you, Steve. Sorry, first of all, my apologies. We were late. It's a big building. We wandered around for a long time, found a nice young gentleman over there that we didn't know, and we spent so much time together, we're going to start exchanging Christmas gifts. A very nice custodian sent us with good faith toward the opposite end of the building where we found a parking lot, and then I happened to wander into a police meeting with guns and almost got arrested, but we made it. So that's why we were late, so our apologies. The wait was well worth it, however. I sit next to Savannah Federo, who you'll get to know very well. Savannah is now technically a senior. I'm sure she passed all her classes, although I'm sure she hasn't received her grades. I've had the good fortune of knowing Savannah for 2 years, and although I rue that this day has come that Phil is actually leaving, she's easily going to slide into that seat. You will see that she has a very keen intellect. She has a great curiosity and a passion when she speaks, and she will use her voice. She will be a great voice for the school. But I know you want to get on with your agenda, so unless you have any questions, we'd be more than happy to let you take this off the agenda. You'll get to know Savannah well next year.
Any questions? Well, welcome. Look forward to seeing you. Thank you. Okay.
Mrs. Hadwick, anything else? No, I'm just kidding. So I'll talk a little bit about the impacts that are on the memo, particularly for folks at home. I think the first impact is that we're suggesting that we redirect use of the federal stimulus dollars for some $89,000. And as you know, these funds exist only in FY10 and 11. ERA money, America's Reinvestment and Recovery Act, and the district has dedicated these monies to develop greater capacity in mathematics instruction and assistance in mathematics for children. So to redirect this money means we're going to lose 3 positions. We will lose 2 math interventionist positions that work with students at both the high school and the middle school, as well as losing a math coach who has been working with teachers at both Little Harbor School and Dondero. So we're going to take the ERA monies and we're going to take a piece of that and redirect it, a sum of $89,000. There's a little bit of good news. Assistant Superintendent Zadrovic did secure, the district had been working and partnering with Somersworth, and had on Memorial Day weekend, actually on a Friday afternoon, he rushed it up to the State House, and I thought he was crazy, but he made it just under the gun and got it in, and we've got a word that we'll have $75,000 next year in DOE money, some federal funds to help math and coaching at the elementary schools, but we'll still lose the support of the interventionists. So that's the good news. And so what we're proposing to do is now take those funds and advance purchase, if you will, or purchase some of the technology and some of the PDs that are appropriate under the grant to that total. The second key impact in our recommendation is to not replace Gwen Baker's position. I want you to know that we did consult with Department Head Steve Cirillo, who actually offered us 3 options to move forward. And so those are on the back of the memo. But by consensus, we agreed to option number 2. And in this, Wendell Purrington would assume the 612 choir director's duties, which would preclude him from teaching a couple of electives that he traditionally teaches at the high school. Mr. Gagnon would now come in and teach a couple of music theory classes in semesters 3 and 4. And it would mean, with that switch, the loss of one instrument taught in the 5th grade band. I couldn't tell you exactly which one of those. There are 9, and it would be the loss of one. Mr. Bartlett consulted with adult education and has actually moved the salary line of that position to tuition and fees, which is to say there will be no more general fund support for the salary of that position, but rather it would be supported through program revenues. Additionally, we adjusted the technology director's work year from 236 days to 216, resulting in about $11,000 reduction in her salary.
I'm sorry, say that again?
We reduced the number of work days from 236 to down 25 days. So there's an adjustment in the length, the term of the contract, the work year. Okay?
Thank you.
Yep, sure. And then all the other adjustments really have occurred because of changes that took place in the last 4 months from the time when this board submitted its budget to the council and what naturally evolved, from February to June. For example, in conjunction with the city, the business manager has gone out and procured natural gas at a lower therm unit next year. So that results in a $20,000 savings. You approved an extension of our property and liability insurance, which gives us a 2.5% savings. Ann Ellis subsequently applied for a 1-year leave of absence. We know Sherry Weston will step into that role, and so to get a 1-year only 6th grade teacher nets us $33,000 in savings. And finally, we had some other late resignations, and we had a couple again today, which brought about $12,000. So that gets us to $259 and change to meet that total. That's what the administrative team would recommend you go forward with. Over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Rebecca?
So I noticed that this is under old business, but this is the first time we're seeing these adjustments.
Well, your FY11 budget's old business. Right.
Okay.
We've been dealing with that for a long time.
Well, okay, but this memo is new.
Absolutely.
Are we supposed to take action on this tonight?
I think we need to, by the end. We have the end of these 2 years coming up.
Budget.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Any questions, any thoughts, any concerns, any clarifications? Yes?
So,
Dexter.
by the way, I can't quarrel with this at all. I mean, obviously, you guys have worked with the entire administration team and have thought it out. I can quarrel about the target, but I can't quarrel with what you've accomplished. But just so that we revisit this one more time in my mind, could you guys tell me what our original level funding budget was? And the reason I want that is I want it to be clear that we've been through a series of reductions, and I don't want anyone to misunderstand that this $259,000 reduction is the only reduction that we've had. Mm-hmm. We've been through a series of them.
We made our own.
We made our own, and then we've responded to others. So, I mean, Steve, do you recall that level funding number? The first proposal, which was fundamentally level funding, status quo, no increase in...
It was a $2.4 million increase over the prior year.
And so it was...
7.2. Right, a 7.2% increase, as I recall.
And so that number was something like $38,600,000 or something like that. Order of magnitude, is that fair?
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
And that was a budget that would provide, to meet our commitments to our staff, our contractual commitments, and to maintain the level services.
That's correct.
It required a budget of $38,600,000, and today we're at a budget that is 36. I don't know if that's the right number.
36,904.
36.9.
Right.
So we've cut almost $2 million from our initial proposal that had level services. I just want to go on the record to make that clear.
17 positions, I would say now, roughly.
That we've cut.
Right. This year.
All right. Thank you.
And on that 17 positions, we've talked about 13 positions in all of our discussions with the public. Those came out of our regular budget. The other positions are the ARA positions that we're losing. Is that correct?
Well, I think that's what gets you to 17 then, if you think
right.
about the ones we talked about tonight.
Right, plus the ones we talked about tonight. Okay.
Right. Leslie.
I'm a little concerned about the music,
Right.
Gwen leaving, and,
Me too.
you know, I guess I understand that they've brought this forward and they feel like it can work. I just don't want it to get lost, and one of the things that they've written here is that one of the options was having Mr. Purrington mentor a new teacher to fill Gwen's position next year. I don't know if that's going to be a possibility, but I really worry about what's going to happen in the middle school, particularly. We have award-winning choral concerts all the time, and that really concerns me.
Right, but we did consult, we did review that.
Yep, I understand that.
And you had other choices that would be closer to, the core academic.
Yep, I understand that. I just want to express my concern about it.
Rebecca, and then Ann.
Yeah, along the same lines, I'm very concerned. Again, it's the arts that are taking a hit.
Right.
Once it's gone, it's back. We're eliminating vocal workshop, we're eliminating a theater class. I mean, now we're into programs, and I just feel like we've, looking at this brainstorm list, it didn't happen. Examine block scheduling, it wouldn't, we'd still offer the same programs, but maybe we'd eliminate the 6-student botany course that we had, and we can utilize our time better. And I understand that we're under the gun, but I in no way can support cutting any part of the music department, especially with, Mr. P is retiring soon, Gwen is leaving. We didn't look at charging for athletic events and transportation. I know that when the theater department does do its shows, that they charge. So we have the ability, we have the capability, and there's not impacting program. Down here, under the Administrative Council on June 15th, you talk about addressing staff attendance and the cost of substitutes. I don't see that. Busing, expanding the walking perimeters. I know that this is what the music department came back to you with, but there was a gun to their heads to cut, and I just feel like, music makes you smarter, and we're shooting ourselves in the foot. And I can't vote for this. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I had Ann, Kent, and then Lisa.
I feel very strongly about the music program as well. However, I'm crushed that Gwen is leaving. We will miss her desperately. But basically, this plan is to have Wendell be doing what he used to do before we had Gwen. And so the only basic change will be that some of the classes that people have been complaining about how small they were, the ones that we're talking about here, they were maybe 2 or 3 people to a class, and that's not sustainable. So under discussion with all that, those are the classes that will be eliminated, and one instrument. Right. So out of that number, that's more doable than anything else I can see. So I would support that.
So I have Kent, Lisa, and Linda.
A number of things I want to bring into discussion here. One is, we've hit bone. This is not a flesh wound. We have finally started to amputate. Okay? And we have in the past to a smaller degree. But as we start to look at this, we are now seeing what vital organs have to stay in place and what things might be eliminated. I look at, the city and the city management totes how wonderful it is to have a AAA bonding. The AAA bonding is a great thing for the city. It helps us in many ways. But what you're starting to do, especially as we start to look at the impact statements that Superintendent provided us, especially with the redirecting of the ERA funding, which we've just started with, is that this is going to be a tough thing in the next year to 2 years of when we start to see those students that struggle not meet a YP. I think, it's in the cards that cities, the city headline could read, city has AAA bonding but has low test scores. So what do? You know, what are you really protecting here? Are you protecting the students? No. The city, damn it all, is not protecting the students in this. This year's budget, as was stated very well with Dexter's questioning, is far below level funding. We also know, the hidden things that are here. And by the way, there is no, I do, we hear it, where is the hidden money from the school department? There is not hidden money in the school department. There's not a safe that we go and we pull it out when we need it. And one of the impacts is we know we've gotten a number of letters and emails regarding the bumping of an outstanding one-year counselor that we have at the high school. We talk about irony. My wife and son met with her today, and I'm not here to support to support and have discussion. It's here that we have an administration that is looking that they would love to have her stay, but under how the union and how we work with that, there is the bumping rights, and that's really a tough thing to do. And we lost a good teacher, as Leslie pointed out. He didn't go too far. They were courting him, and they could see, and that's what's going to happen over the next year. If we think $259,000 is a loss, I believe we're looking at $850,000 or more next year as we look at tea leaves. I hope that it's heard. I think the parents that stood from the wave did an outstanding job. I think what happened is that the city council didn't listen as well as they should have with them, because they are the ones that are going to make the final decisions. This budget does not belong to the school board, and it does not belong to the city council. It belongs to the people of Portsmouth. So, in stating all that, I'll go to support with what the superintendent has. I hope we can find some adjustments in the very near future to maybe keep on excellent, as Shannon Grenier as a counselor, as a student college counselor on there. We've been onslaughted. I respect everybody that sent those emails. And we started to amputate, and I really hope we can have discussion and turn this around in the next 12 months.
I'm nervous of time here, so I'm not really sure how we're going to handle this time, because I think we really need to have conversation, but we need to vacate the building. So I have Linda and Lisa. Lisa and Linda.
Scratch me if I'm okay.
Okay.
I'll just say every other word. I do not like to see that we have some cuts in music, but it is not just the arts we're cutting. We're cutting our regular programming, we're cutting our SPED support, we're cutting our system support, we're cutting our adult ed, we're cutting our technology.
Correct.
We have increased enrollment at the elementary schools, and we are not increasing the teachers that are there. There are going to be 20 more kids at Little Harbor and not one more adult in the building. There's going to be no Title I in that building, so there's going to be fewer adults in that building. We don't have a behavior interventionist at the middle school anymore. We have rising class sizes. So it's not just music. If we go from 9 instruments to 8 instruments, I have to be okay with that. I don't want to be okay with that. I would like for us to refill every position that leaves, but we can't do that unless we have more support in our budget. So we are at bone. It's not just music, it's everything.
Did you have something you wanted to say?
That's it. That's a short version.
Well, right, but so the other piece that just to confuse the whole issue even a bit more is you have a request from Principal Collins this evening, which really is, I think a classic example of the law of unintended consequences and the way the teacher contract works. Basically, he's advocating to retain the services of Shannon Grenier, who has come in as a first-year college counselor at the high school and done a fabulous job. As you recall, we did not eliminate the position in budget, but because of bumping rights, she was not offered a contract. She's the least senior counselor on the seniority list. But you did receive a number of emails, or at least I did, and I shared with you this evening, as I promised I would, who are advocating for her to remain in light of the strong performance. And so, most importantly, Principal Collins has put forth a plan, and I guess I'd just like to speak to this a little bit, that would, I think, make great use of her as a resource, as well as speaks to the importance of trying to sustain that good work that's happened. So what we're trying to think about here is maybe bridging a year's time to keep her on board as best we can, because we see her as a wonderful resource should we have the Great Schools Partnership, the 5-year grant, where we're trying to increase post-secondary enrollment. She can be the resource that helps us. So we're trying to think about how can we bridge this and not lose that service at the high school. And secondly, I think Principal Collins has looked at how to best use the resource that's coming to him, the behavior interventionist at the middle school. We have a person who knows those 8th graders, they transition, and how we can set up and make sure that those at-risk students get the services they need as they move into the high school. It would take some creative funding, looking at some ERA funds, and maybe whatever we have for a balance forward to make this happen. So we'd have to manage this to make it happen, but I think that's another piece that you ought to be thinking about as you contemplate moving forward with the FY11 budget.
Do we have an approximation of the cost? Just, and again, 65?
With benefits is a little higher, I believe, Kent. I think it's higher than that.
75?
Somewhere in that ballpark. It's probably a little higher, as I recollect.
And so what you're suggesting is that from some of the stimulus money, that there would be a way to cover this position for 1 year, so it's not being added to the budget, it's using money that we already have, as a bridge to the potential for this possible grant.
Right, because what would prohibit us from being in the same spot a year from now? And so if we can't sustain it, then it wouldn't make sense. And so we really think we have a good opportunity with this federal grant coming forward to have a 5-year sustainability plan if we can get and bridge this year.
Okay, Lisa and Kent. And then, I'm sorry, and Phil. Yes.
And then each of the people would be in a position that played to their strength and our investment in those people.
Right. Yes.
Parliamentary and inquiring question to the superintendent. If a contract was offered to Shannon Grenier, is there anyone else that's in line that still could bump her? There is nothing? And parliamentary, prior to proposing the budget side, it would be that process should be that the first thing is a contract should be offered by the board to Shannon Grenier prior to accepting it, so that she is locked into the budget, and that we need to find whatever it is around $75,000 before we adopt that budget. So I'll make a motion.
Well,
okay, go ahead. Before I go? That's fine.
I was going to suggest two things. One was that we would not be taking it out of the general fund budget. We would be trying to manage it with some stimulus funds and whatever balance forward we might be able to dedicate. So I'm not asking for it out of the...
Correct. But contractually,
and if you granted me authority to hire positions and we could make it work, I would offer her a contract.
Which is on the agenda.
That was my thinking.
As we usually do
We usually do in the summer anyway.
Right.
So you would work that out between now and then with Shannon. I mean, obviously the candidate that, again, I don't like cloudiness, so that candidate, that one at the end there, because I wasn't sure, that's what we normally do, is we grant you that, but your candidate for that is Shannon, is that correct?
Right. Okay. So we've got Phil and Ann. Okay, Phil? You're up.
All right, I'll be brief, but the way I look at it, this is a time for choosing for you guys. Now, you can either stay on this road, take the course of action, ignore the calls and the pleas, or the way I see it, you can take the road, which sometimes, we want to go on that road most of the time, but sometimes there's barriers that prevent us from going down it. My personal belief is for you to go down that road, go past the barriers, because your job, your role is to serve the needs of the students of Portsmouth and the surrounding areas. And by ignoring those calls and ignoring those pleas, it's almost as if we're saying, well, forget it, it's over. Strongly consider where you're going to go. If it were me, we'd be going down that road full speed ahead, because it is for the kids. And it doesn't affect me, I'm gone next year. But it affects all those people that I know and all those people who are yet to come. So at least consider that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ann?
Our board, 16-member board, has asked that I speak for keeping the position of the guidance counselor for a lot of reasons. Many of them we just don't have time tonight to go through them all. But this position is vital for the kids in high school. Just this class alone, 18% of the kids who graduated had been at one or two or three other high schools before they came to Portsmouth. So those kids are transfer students. So they're not as if we followed them through from the Portsmouth or surrounding area districts. So we ask that you keep this position. Shannon has done an excellent job this year, and we need that kind of quality person to help these kids move on, whether they're going on to apprenticeships or to any other form of education, their next steps in the career. It's vital for them.
Thank you. Dexter and then Ann.
So would the chair be willing to accept a motion to accept the proposed budget adjustments outlined in the superintendent's June 15th memo, getting additional reductions to our budget of $259,000?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion on this?
Just need to clarify.
Okay.
It's the reduction, we're not voting, to our budget. And normally, our final vote on a budget is on the actual budget number.
We're accepting the recommendations.
So, just for clarification from Steve, I'd like to have the exact amount that we're voting on for the record.
No, for both. So,
I see.
No, but there's two people. So I would amend that then with
to accept this.
To accept these adjustments and also to approve the final budget number of $36,990.
36,000?
36 million.
City Council.
Wow, there was a cut.
And that's second.
Is that the correct number, Steve?
Yes, this is
$36 million.
$36,990,000.
Okay, so
right, it's the 1.82% increase, i.e. inflation that require.
As long as it's for the record.
So that was the motion. Both of those are combined?
Correct.
Into one. That we accept the recommendation to make the adjustments and that we make the adjustment to the final budget number to be $36,904,000.
Correct.
Okay. Let's take a roll call vote on that.
And Walker.
Carol Chelman?
Yes.
Kent LePage?
With great sadness.
Dexter Legg?
Yes.
Rebecca Emerson?
No.
Ann Walker?
Yes.
Mitch Schulman?
Yes.
Tom Martin?
Yes.
Leslie Stevens?
Yes.
Lisa Sweet?
With regrets.
Okay, thank you. So looking at new business, I'd like to propose a couple of quick things because we have really limited time. I would like to take up, at least B and C right now, just to take care of the approval for the superintendent to hire during the summer.
So moved.
Second. Any discussions on that at all? All in favor of accepting?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Superintendent evaluation, I'll just tell you very quickly. You have the information in your packet. Trying to set a date, right, for you to get back this information back to, we'll have it sent to Amy, who will collate it for us.
I can send it electronically, too.
electronically.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, and then they can fill it out online. So here's the dates I'd like to propose. I'd like to wind this process up at our next board meeting, July 27th. So we would have a non-public meeting before that to go over the superintendent evaluation, so we need to have it back. And I'm going to suggest that we try to have it back, and you tell me if it's okay with you, by July 6th. That would give Amy more than enough time, I hope, to collate all the information. So it would be an overall rating, because you're supposed to, there's a little spot to rate between 1 and 5, 5 being fabulous, 1 being not so good. And then there's a space for written comments, and so that the numbers would be collated, so we'll have the average number for each of those pieces in the evaluation, and then the written comments as well. And then we'll have a non-public, and we'll talk about it. And just so you know that the evaluation is based off of the job description, so it's pretty close. Yes.
Just keep in mind when we schedule that non-public that we've also scheduled a technology meeting for 5, so we'll need to be mindful of that.
Got it. Yes?
Question on the evaluation for the superintendent. Yeah, we're trying to figure out, okay, page 4 flips to page...
That's right here, page 5.
Yeah.
Okay, that's where it rates it onto it, okay.
Okay. So no question? Okay. And so, just so then moving on to the last item, which I don't know how we're going to do this, we'll just talk about how we want to proceed from here. We have a number of brainstorming items on this list that the superintendent has pulled together. Many of these have come up in conversation amongst ourselves over the budget process as to ways that we might consider moving forward and issues to look at that might actually save us money. Some of it comes from suggestions from the Administrative Council themselves. On the back, these were some of the suggestions that Councilor Dwyer had sent to me, because I had asked her to be a little specific and help to give us some guidance in areas that she thought that the schools might be able to have some savings. So this is all written down here. The idea was to see if we could begin a conversation tonight, but I don't believe we have any time to. But I think we really need to, I'd like you to actually look at this, digest this, and sort of help me figure out what process the board would like to move forward on and how we actually begin to tackle this. For example, I think the administration at some point in the not-too-distant future would like some guidance from us as to which major areas we might ask them to think about. So I'd like you to think about that, maybe either email in, or we can put this on as a work session for our next meeting in July. I'm open to seeing how the board would like to move forward.
I think that we do need to move forward and entertain all the suggestions that are on there, but I want to make sure that we have an overarching guideline that says we are looking at the educational quality and how we get to that, because I think that the discussion has become focused on numbers and cost at the expense of educational value and investment. So if we could just maybe together set a guideline that reflects that for all of our discussions.
Okay. Leslie.
I also think it's important to talk about what worked well and what did not work well in the process this year. I've heard feedback from particularly teachers about the process, and so I think that's a piece of it.
Okay, Kent?
I'll move that we have a work session. I don't like to see this tacked on to a meeting just like tonight.
Want to have a separate work session?
I highly suggest that prior to our July meeting, we have a 1 to 2 hour work session that we can go over these, because I know I worked to make sure that there were some things here I'd love to see us see if we turn them up or turn them down.
Right.
And I think we're going to need, in that meeting, I think we need to discuss, we had talked about putting a group together for doing budget discussion.
We did talk about that.
So I'd like that discussion to begin the dialogue, whether we want to do it all as a team, or we allow other board members to come back to us.
Rebecca, and then we'll set a date.
Well, and I think that we'll, after Thursday's meeting of the Efficiencies Committee with the city, that's also going to flesh out a lot of things that we can bring back.
So what about July 13th?
Yeah.
Tuesday, July 13th? Tentative? Yeah? Okay, we'll send that date around. We'll see how many people can make it. Okay? All right. Anything else?